It was a gray and damp morning in New York. The streets were always chaotic, made especially grim by the noise of taxis echoing between the buildings and the hurried footsteps of people trying to escape the cold in front of a Brooklyn bakery where the aroma of freshly baked croissants and bagels mingled with the steam of hot coffee. A golden dog appeared out of nowhere. He looked like an out-of-place spot of sadness in the bustle of the city. His thin body was shaking and his matted, dirty golden fur seemed to tell the story of days spent alone. But what stood out most were his eyes, big brown eyes that didn't just beg for food but pleaded for something deeper. He didn't bark or lunge, he just sat still with a painful dignity, watching the customers come and go as if each one might be his last hope. Inside, Maria, the owner of the bakery, first noticed the dog as she was setting out a tray of cupcakes. Her heart sank. She had seen many stray dogs roaming the streets of New York, but there was something different. This one, he seemed to be on the verge of despair but still maintained a meek demeanor. Every now and then he would hesitantly raise his paw as if he wanted to knock on the door but never did, as if he was waiting for permission that never came. The scene began to attract the attention of customers. The older woman stopped, mumbling something about a dog that reminded her of a golden retriever she had lost many years ago. The young man threw his bagel in the trash and looked at the animal guiltily, but no one did anything. Life in New York went on relentlessly, swallowing such stories without a second thought. As the day began to turn to evening, Maria went outside to throw the remains of the bread in the trash. The dog was still there, slowly getting up. He did not run, did not pounce, he just very slowly approached until his paw touched Maria's hand. She froze, feeling the cold, damp touch. For a moment it seemed as if all the noise of the city had disappeared. There was only her and that look. And that was when she realized that this dog was not just lost, it was waiting for someone, something, a last chance. Maria froze, feeling the dog's paw in her hand, like a silent plea that seemed to pierce her soul. The deafening noise of the city, the humming footsteps, the voices disappeared for a moment. There was an inexplicable connection between them, something she could not understand. When she looked into those brown eyes, filled with sadness, she felt a familiar pain, as if this scene had awakened memories she had buried many years ago. "You are lost, aren't you?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The dog bowed his head, as if he understood. He understood. He did not try to break free from her hand or demand anything more. He just stood and waited. What struck her most was the silence. The silence of the animal. He didn't beg. He simply existed with a dignity that seemed too fragile for the brutal world of New York streets. Maria dropped to her knees, ignoring the cold concrete seeping through her pants. She ran her hand through the matted fur and felt the bones beneath the thin skin. He was weak, that much was obvious, but something in him seemed to be struggling with a strength that was beyond the physical. The dog seemed determined not to give in, even when everything else said it would. He was about to enter the bakery. Customers were peering in the window, some with curiosity, others with disdain or indifference. "You can't bring a mongrel like that inside," the man said as he walked past with a bag full of bread. Maria ignored him. Something inside her told her this meeting was no coincidence. She stood up, took a deep breath and opened the door of the bakery. "Come on, man," she said firmly. The dog hesitated, looking at her as if he couldn't believe the offer. Then slowly he took the first step, crossing the threshold between the cold world and the promise of warmth. Once inside, he shook himself lightly, splashing little drops of water onto the wooden floor. Maria grabbed a rag, wiped the floor and looked at the animal, who was now lying in the corner, exhausted but finally safe. As she set down a bowl of water and a few pieces of bread, she couldn't help but think how different this moment was from anything she had ever experienced. The dog wasn't just an intruder or a problem that needed to be solved. He seemed to carry something secret inside her that Maria couldn't figure out yet, but was about to discover, something that would change her life forever. The next morning, the bakery was more crowded than usual. The news about the bakery dog had spread throughout the area. Now customers came not only for the bagels and coffee but also to see the new customer. The dog, lying in the corner near the counter, watched everything with his calm, attentive gaze, yet he didn't move. His presence seemed to have a strange effect on the atmosphere of the place. Maria, taking orders, couldn't stop sneaking glances at him. Ever since the dog had walked in the door, something inside her kept moving. She didn't know what it was. Guilt, maybe old memories that were trying to push their way To the surface though she tried low suppress them as she made a cappuccino for a customer. She remembered her childhood in Queens, a golden retriever very similar to this one named Max, and how she lost him. Will you keep him? Maria, a familiar voice asked. Was it Mrs. Henderson, a regular customer carrying her bag of bread? A dog like that wouldn't survive on the streets for long. Maria hesitated. I don't know yet. He came out of nowhere yesterday and I'm not sure if he's really a street dog. Maybe he ran away from someone. Mrs. Henderson leaned over and looked at the animal. Whoever had let him go didn't deserve it. Made him look back, looked at him like he was waiting for something or someone. Maria knew the words were true, but there was something more to this dog, something she still couldn't put her finger on, something deeper than hunger or abandonment. It was almost as if he was carrying a story no one could hear because he didn't have a voice to tell it. Later, when the bakery was empty, Maria sat down next to him on the floor. She hesitantly ran her hand through his still matted fur. He lifted his head and looked straight at her so intently Maria felt a lump in her throat, like he was trying to say something, maybe a plea or a silent confession. The feeling was so strong she found herself speaking without thinking. What happened to you, boy? What are you trying to tell me? That night Maria decided to take the dog home. It wasn't that she planned to do, but she couldn't leave him in the bakery. The street was shrill, it was cold, and she knew the animal wouldn't survive another night on the streets. As they walked along the sidewalks lit by yellow street lamps, the sounds of taxis and voices echoing in the distance, Maria noticed something curious. The dog was walking next to her with the bearing of a loyal companion, not pulling or hesitating, as if he was used to following someone. As they reached the small apartment she rented on the second floor of an old building, Maria opened the door and turned on the light. The dog walked in slowly and calmly, looking around. He seemed at ease, as if he had been there before. Maria frowned, feeling a chill run down her spine, but quickly dismissed the thought. She grabbed a towel with warm water and began to wash the dog, being careful not to hurt him. As she rubbed the dirty fur, she noticed something unexpected. There was a mark on the dog's neck, a thin but noticeable scar, as if he worn a collar too tight for too long. Maria paused for a moment. Her fingers gently touched the mark. You belong to someone, don't you? She whispered. The dog looked at her, and for a moment she thought he understood. Maria felt a strange heaviness in her chest, as if the animal were a puzzle whose final piece was still missing. Later, as she settled on the sofa with a cup of tea, the dog lying at her feet, breathing slowly, the silence of the moment brought unwanted memories to the surface. Maria thought of Max, her golden retriever from childhood. He had been her best friend, a safe haven during the toughest times in her life, until one day her father, in a fit of rage, decided they no longer needed a burden and gave him up to a shelter. Maria never knew what happened to him after that. It can't be, she muttered, looking at him up to a shelter. Maria never knew what happened to him after that. It can't be, she muttered, looking at the sleeping golden dog. The thought was absurd, but there was something about him that made her feel like she was looking at a ghost from the past. She shook her head, laughing at herself. You're going crazy. However, that night, as Maria was trying to sleep, she heard a soft sound coming from the living room. She rose slowly, hesitantly, to find the dog sitting by the window, looking out at the street lit by lampposts. He was motionless, but he seemed to be waiting for something or someone, and in that moment Maria realized that maybe he wasn't waiting. She had saved the dog, maybe he was coming back to save her. The next morning, Maria woke to the sound of soft scratching on the living room door. The golden dog was sitting there, looking at her with attentive, patient eyes. He seemed to want to go outside, but not so desperately, as if he had a goal. Do you want to go outside? Maria asked the still sleepy dog, tilting her head, and she felt the answer was clear. She put on her coat, tied a makeshift leash to the dog and went downstairs. Once they were outside, the dog went in a certain direction. Without hesitation Maria followed him, intrigued. He seemed to know the way. Ignoring the loud sounds of cars and the rushing crowd, the path made no sense to Maria. It was a mixture of busy turns and quiet alleys. She tried to talk to the dog, but he did not turn away or slow down. Each step seemed to lead to a destination she could not predict. After almost half an hour of walking, they reached a small abandoned park tucked between two tall buildings. The dog stopped next to an old weathered wooden bench. He sat there staring at a tall gnarled tree nearby. Maria felt a chill. Why was he here? She muttered, trying to understand what it meant. Looking around, something began to seem strangely familiar. The tree, the bench, it was like an echo of an Old memory. Then it occurred to her it was the park she'd taken Max to when she was a child, the same place she'd played with him for hours, running from the screams and arguments at home. Her chest tightened. "Have you been here before?" she asked the dog. Her voice was shaking. He just looked at her as if the answer was obvious, not knowing what to do. Maria sat down on the bench. Her heart was pounding. The idea was absurd. The dog couldn't be Max. It was impossible. But the more she looked at him, the more she felt like she'd encountered something that defied logic. He wasn't just a lost stranger, there was a connection between them she couldn't explain, but it seemed deep. Suddenly an older woman approached her carrying a bag full of bread to feed the birds. She stopped and looked at the dog with a look of recognition. "I've seen that dog before," she said quietly. Maria quickly turned to her. "What do you mean?" As the woman pointed hesitantly at the dog. "A few years ago he'd been hanging around on a fishing trip in Queens, but he disappeared, as if he was looking for something or someone." The woman's words echoed in Maria's head as she walked home with the dog by her side. Looking for something or someone. The phrase seemed like a clue, but to a mystery she still couldn't figure out. Throughout the walk Maria tried to organize her thoughts, but more and more memories from her childhood kept surfacing, mixing with reality. She wondered if she was projecting her guilt onto the dog, or if there was something deeper that she still couldn't understand. That night when the dog was sleeping on the living room carpet, Maria decided to take action. She grabbed her laptop and started looking for information on the shelter the woman had mentioned. After a few unsuccessful attempts she found the name: Hope Haven Animal Shelter, a small shelter located in Queens not far from the neighborhood where she grew up. Mary's heart pounded. She hesitated for a moment before writing down the address of the dress and deciding that she would come the next day. The next morning, with the dog beside her, Maria rode the subway to Queens. The ride was quiet, but her mind was racing. When they arrived, the shelter looked as shabby as she had imagined. A rusty tent, small crooked gate, and a plain building with peeling paint. A middle-aged woman with a soft expression and plain clothes came out to greet her. "Can I help you?" Maria quickly explained how she had found the dog and mentioned what the woman in the park had said. The guardian who introduced herself as Ellen looked closely at the dog and seemed to recognize him right away. "Oh yes, I remember that boy we called Lucky. He showed up here a few years ago with an old collar and marks on his neck. He lived with us for a while, but one day he disappeared. We never knew where he went." Lucky, Maria muttered, kneeling next to the dog. He looked at her as if he was waiting for something. "He asked someone," she asked, her voice trembling. Ellen shook her head. "We never found the owner, but he was different. He always seemed to be waiting for someone. He never didn't talk to her, even though he was so cute." Maria's chest tightened as if a puzzle piece was about to fall into place as Maria petted the dog. Ellen seemed to hesitate before continuing. "You know, there's something curious about him. When we found him, there was a small piece of metal sticking out of his collar. It was a locket with a name engraved on it." Maria looked up, her heart pounding. "What was his name?" Ellen walked into the building and returned with a small, old envelope inside. She pulled out a silver locket with letters worn away by time. Maria's hands shook as she took the item and read what was engraved. For a moment, her breath caught in her throat. It was a name she never expected to see. Max. Maria froze, her fingers clutching the small locket as if it were a fragment of a dream. It was impossible. It couldn't be. Max. Years had passed, decades even. But when she looked at the dog next to her, that gnawing feeling returned in full force. He was looking at her with those deep, calm eyes, as if he already knew what she had found. "Are you sure he came with that locket?" Maria asked Ellen, trying to keep her voice low. The woman nodded, not taking her eyes off the locket. "Yes, he had it on his collar when he came. We kept it because it seemed important, but we never found anyone to take it." Ellen hesitated, noticing the change in Maria's expression. "Do you know that name?" Maria didn't know how to answer. Part of her wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, but another, deeper part whispered that it was true. "I had a dog named Max when I was a child," she began, her voice almost shaking. "He was a golden retriever. My father had taken him one day, I didn't know where," and now she was holding the locket, as if the object were both an answer and a question at the same time. Ellen looked at her sympathetically. "I don't know how to explain that this Lucky guy, or Max as you call him, came here many years ago. We don't know where he came from, but he always seemed to be looking for something or someone. Maybe he found you." The words sounded absurd, but at the same time they made sense. Maria couldn't explain. The dog, who was now lying next to her, seemed calm, as if he was glad to finally be where he belonged. Maria felt a wave of emotion wash over her, as if all the guilt and unanswered questions she had carried for years were lifted in that moment. But how was that possible? She silently asked herself more than Ellen. There was no logical explanation. The time, the distance, the odds, it all made the idea ridiculous. And yet there he was with the pendant confirming the name she hadn't spoken out loud in years, as Maria stroked the dog's golden fur, tears streaming down her face. Max, or Lucky as they called him, now came closer and laid his head on her lap. It was a simple gesture but full of meaning. For the first time in a long time Maria felt peace. It didn't matter if there was logic to the story, all that mattered was that somehow they were together again. The walk home seemed longer than ever. Maria held the medallion in one hand and with the other she held tightly to the makeshift leash of Max's dog. She could no longer call him anything else. He walked next to her with a calm but determined step, as if he knew they were heading to where he finally belonged. The medallion felt heavier than it should have in her palm, holding all the childhood memories Maria thought she had buried. When they arrived at the apartment, Maria closed the door and sat on the floor. Still holding the locket, Max watched her, his head slightly lowered, as if waiting for her to speak. The room, usually warm and welcoming, was suffocated by the weight of the revelation. "How did you find your way back to me?" Maria murmured, more to herself than to him. "It's been so many years, I didn't even know where you were." She remembered vividly the day Max had been taken away. It had been a hot summer day and her father, impatient and exasperated, had sold Max was a burden. Maria had begged and cried, but the words of a 10-year-old girl carried no weight against the cold determination of a person hardened by life. When she came home from school that day, the yard was empty and Max had never returned. "I thought you were." She froze, the word caught in her throat. But Max lying at her feet was living proof that something more stronger than chance was plotting to bring them together again. Maria stroked his fur, now clean and softer, a feeling of connection so strong that it seemed to transcend the time of days. What followed, Maria couldn't think of anything else. The story of Max, or Lucky as he was called at the shelter, spread throughout the neighborhood. Some customers from the bakery began leaving him gifts of food, toys, and even a new bed. Despite this, Maria felt like there was something else going on, as if Max's journey to her wasn't over. One night, while looking through old papers in a forgotten box in the closet, Maria found a photograph. It was a photo of her as a child with Max at the same park he had taken her to a few weeks ago. She touched the photograph carefully, tears welled up in her eyes. The dog in the photograph was proof that Max had always been her safe haven, even when the rest of her life seemed to be falling apart. She placed the photograph next to the locket on the nightstand and walked into the living room. Max was lying on the carpet with his eyes closed, but his breathing was calm. Maria sat down next to him, leaning against the wall. "I don't know how you did it, but thank you for coming back," she whispered behind. For the first time she felt that no matter what happened they were exactly where they were meant to be, together. Finally home. The next morning Maria was awakened by an unexpected soft knock on her apartment door. Max, always alert, looked up and stared at the entrance. When Maria opened the door she saw Ellen, the caretaker of the shelter, holding a small envelope. "Sorry for coming unannounced, but I thought you might be interested," Ellen said, holding out the envelope with a serious look. Inside was an old form from the shelter with information about the day of arrival. Maria carefully unfolded the paper. The document was faded but still legible. It contained information about Max's condition when he was found emaciated, with marks on his neck and signs of malnutrition. The most intriguing part was a note with an incomplete address and name. Mr. Howard explained that the address was found on an old colored envelope that Max was carrying when he arrived. "We were never able to trace who this person was. Perhaps you can find out more," Ellen said before saying goodbye. As soon as Maria closed the door, she felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The name and address seemed like important clues, but they also brought back memories of her father and the cruel decision that had marked her childhood. With Max lying at her feet, she opened her laptop and began searching. The research led to a street in Queens, but the house number was missing, making the exact location a mystery. But Maria decided she had to go there. She took Max for a walk and called a taxi, feeling her heart pound with every kilometer. When they reached the right street, something familiar came over her. The old houses and abandoned gardens seemed frozen in time. Maria and Max walked slowly, taking in every detail until they reached a small rusty gate where a faded nameplate with the last name Howard was nailed to the wooden fence, almost invisible under the fallen leaves. Maria shuddered. She pushed the gate, which creaked loudly, and walked down the street, the path to a modest house with broken windows and peeling walls. Max stopped next to her, his eyes fixed on the door as if he knew this was the right place. Maria hesitated before knocking, but there was no answer. She peered through the window and saw a deserted interior with dusty furniture and boxes scattered on the floor. Just as she was about to leave, an elderly neighbor appeared. "Are you looking for Mr. Howard?" Maria asked, briefly telling her story, and the man nodded. "He moved away many years ago. He was a lonely man, but he loved that dog. He always said that the dog was waiting for someone important. I guess he never had the courage to let him go for good." The neighbor's words left Maria deep in thought as she walked home with Max by her side. There were so many scattered pieces of the puzzle, but one thing was certain: Max had come a long way to find her. Maybe Mr. Howard was only a temporary guardian, looking after Max until the right time to return him to where he truly belonged. Back at the apartment, Maria sat on the couch next to Max, holding the locket in one hand and the entry about the shelter in the other. Her head was full of unanswered questions. Who really was Mr. Howard, and how Max survived and found his way back to her? The silence of the apartment seemed filled with meanings that she could not fully comprehend. Max, on the contrary, seemed calm, as if he already had all the answers he needed. As Maria stroked Max's head, she noticed something she had not noticed before on the back of the locket. It was the almost faded inscription, "Never too late." The simple words carried an unexpected weight. She reread them several times, feeling that this was a message meant for both her and Max. Perhaps fate was offering them a second chance, a chance to make up for lost time in the past. Determined to close the circle, Maria decided to do something she had been avoiding for years: visit her old house in Queens. It was the place where she grew up, but it was also the place where she lost Max and so many other important things. With a heavy heart, she put a makeshift leash on Max and left, this time deciding not to call a taxi. Walking there seemed like the right way to face the past. As they pulled up to the house, Maria felt her stomach twist. The garden was neglected and the rusty fence was falling apart. Despite this, childhood memories came flooding back to her, both good and painful. Max stopped next to her, quietly looking around the house as if he recognized the place too. Maria took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A strange woman opened it, explaining that she had bought the house many years ago. Maria smiled awkwardly and asked about the family that had lived there before. The woman didn't know much, only mentioning that there were some old things left in the basement. "You can take a look if you want," she suggested. Hesitantly, Maria walked inside, feeling the walls echoing with the voices of a time that now seemed far away. In the basement she found a small wooden box with her name hastily written on it. Inside were old photographs, childhood drawings, and a sealed envelope with shaking hands. She opened the envelope and found a letter written by her father. The words were full of regret. He apologized for taking Max away from her and admitted that he should never have done it. At the end of the letter he wrote, "I hope that one day Max will find his way back to you. He was always stronger than me." Maria sat on the floor, tears streaming down her face. The letter confirmed what she had always known in her heart. Max had never stopped looking for her, and now they were finally together again. Looking at Max, who was sitting next to her, she smiled. "I think we're finally where we're meant to be, boy, home."